I'm Denis. I work in Futurice for 9 months, exactly like 9 months. You can even count days. It's 9 months here. I'm a developer. I used to do some testing. Well, I actually started to do tests or in my project about 4 or 5 months ago. So before that, I was not doing testing at all. So I decided to go with React testing library because it was so nicely looking. And there also was a standard one, which is Enzyme. And I decided to not go with that one. But then I ended up in a project which was using Enzyme anyway. So I was upset. And I decided to share my experience of how React testing library was much better than Enzyme, given my circumstances. So it kind of feels opinionated, and truth is, it is opinionated, but I'm also trying to be objective. We can actually, since we only have 15 minutes, well, 20-ish, yes. So we can actually make this talk a talk. So if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. I'm very interruptible. I don't have a title, like real one, but I have a goal. The goal is to encourage use of testing in React applications in general through comparison of Enzyme and React testing library in favor of React testing library. And I have a really solid plan to do that. Yes, I want to discuss reasons to test, why you don't test, and how Enzyme and React testing library handles all of those, like in general. Then we'll compare methodologies and abstractions of our Enzyme and React testing library and see those in action if we have time. So reasons are really simple. I'm not going much through those. So if you imagine any feature, like absolutely any feature, we always have a really happy path for a feature, and we make sure that if we click through everything, that it's working. If you enter correct password, if we enter correct login, it is working. And the same for unhappy path, that if we enter wrong password, it is not working. The problem is that in any application, we have quite many features to test, and it's more of a maze of happy and unhappy paths that we want to cover in our tests. And the thing is that quite many features in the applications are so easy to be forgotten, and usually I end up losing the point of my application are completely like in a month or so, especially if it's a long-term one. So if we imagine our different models and onboarding pages, this is something that you usually write just once, and then you forget that they exist. But tests never forget, and they are all so nice about that. And reasons not to test, and let's keep those in mind. I don't really have our specific descriptions of these reasons, but let's keep those in mind because React testing library covers those reasons to not test, and that's why you want to take another look at it. First of all, it really takes time to learn testing. At least some people might think that. And this is truth if we consider Enzyme, there's quite a lot of learning framework involved there. It's also hard to get started in their actual project because you should consider refactoring your code occasionally, sometimes, like make it more independent, make it more isolated for unit testing. And also maintenance might be a problem sometimes. And let's keep these reasons in mind and consider testing React application in general. Again, if you have questions right away, you should ask. No? 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 Fine? Then don't say that you did not understand anything. Okay, so Enzyme, a standard library for testing React, and it's quite old one. We also have React testing library, which is very young, but I kind of like it because of its young. Age doesn't matter, right? And Enzyme is based on React testing and it's based on logic. React testing library is based on DOM. We also have Jest. I was surprised that many people do not know what Jest is and how it's different from Enzyme and React testing library. It's basically a library for running JavaScript assertions. It's pretty much it. These 5 words on the right side is like the whole Jest. It's describe, it's it, expectations, assertions, and like a few other things. It's Jest. There's not much to talk about. So every test suite possible is actually Jest, and you put your Enzyme or RTL code inside. And let's make a small And very quick wrap up about testing, like the whole testing, absolutely whole testing that's possible. It basically can be split up in unit tests and end-to-end tests. And unit test is really low because it kind of focuses on the lower abstraction. It works more with the code of your application and how the data flows, how variables work, and how logic functions in your application. And there are also end-to-end tests, which are about interacting with your application, making sure it really works. If you can imagine a person clicking through an application, that's a very cheap end-to-end test. And here are all the libraries that we will discuss today, except for Cypress, we will not discuss today. So Enzyme is really low, are in the unit testing, because it's on this scale of abstraction, because it's really based on their implementation details. And React testing library is somewhere in the middle. It's closer to interacting with user, but it's not as close as Cypress, for example, because if we consider Cypress, that's like it's an application which runs your application and you can click through everything, take screenshots, videos. So it's like a real user. So let's think about Enzyme and React testing library at the same time and about testing React in general. Like absolutely all of those work in 4 different steps. They render a component first. So if you want to write a test in Enzyme on React testing library, you have to hit render first. Then you need to select an element or make some changes and run assertions based on that. And even though Enzyme and React testing library are serving the very same purpose, they're doing this in a super different way. So if we think about render, for Enzyme, it's shallow render, which means that you can actually mount your component, you can render any part of the component without caring about the surroundings and the context of your component. So if you have some data from Redux, it doesn't matter. You can also render it deeply or fully. I don't know which would be the better word. Let's call it deeply. And React testing library only renders it in a deep way, so unfolding all of the components. So from this perspective, it's a bit harder to render a component with React testing library if it depends on routers or context or Redux. Selection of elements works by class names or display names with find method in Enzyme and with test IDs and matchers in React testing library. And of course, we will have code for that. Making changes are in Enzyme, it's one of the key actual differences. And this is what makes Enzyme more complicated in learning because Enzyme works in a way that it directly accesses the component instance. So you will have the access to the prototype of the component, and you are expected to make some manipulations on this component instance and run functions like directly. React testing library, however, handles all the events, handles changes by clicking through your application, so it kind of replicates the user behavior. Assertions in the Enzyme based on state, so it again directly accesses the component instance. And in React testing library, it's based on DOM. And in my opinion, this is a really key difference because if you consider how you test a feature, you think that if I will click this button and if I type some certain text, if I click the submit button, then something will happen and something will change. And this is exactly what's the idea of React testing library, because in Enzyme, it considers that if you activate a component instance, then the state of the previous component is different in a certain way. And it's kind of a little bit more of machinery way of thinking, in my opinion. So this is how they work in general. And let's have a practical example for a to-do application, of course. Very simple one. You enter the to-do name, you edit, and there is also edit mode. So let's consider that we already have installed Enzyme and React testing library, all both at the same time. They're really easy to install. If you want to do that, you can do this like in 10 minutes. So the first step in rendering. So in Enzyme, you first render a component or an element using mount. And it works differently in React testing library. Whenever you render a component, you can get the matchers that you are going to use later on in your applications. And matchers are written in a natural language. So if you are using get by text, I think you would expect some element with certain text to be returned. So it's very easy to learn. Finding an element works by using defined methods in Enzyme. And already now it has a few drawbacks because this find method will never fail. Like, actually, if it will not say that this element was not found. Very sad. I was so sad about it. It just will say that your assertion failed, and you could not enter some text in the elements of, I don't know, dog. So changes are, well, you basically simulate real changes, and then you submit the form, which is also a different way of thinking. Here, if I would try to simulate a click on the submit button, nothing would happen. It would be very upsetting, and also not what you expect as a user. So users do not simulate submit event on the form. They click on buttons. And then you make an assertion that the state of to-dos has changed to, well, some new state with a new to-do being added to it. So the assertion is being run on the state of the component, which is merely an implementation detail. And it's also not how users will think about the application. It means that the state has changed. It doesn't mean that the application that this are to do has appeared anywhere. And this is how React testing library is handling the very same part of the application. You get some matches that you want to use. Then you get the list by using some test IDs. So I just wrote to-do list inside of my component, and I know that this element exists. Then I fire event of click to their add to-do button. And I just expect the list of to-dos, which I got by this test ID, to not be empty. So it means that I just edit something because it's not empty. Make sense? I think it does. So it really replicates the user behavior. If I will enter a name of to-do in their application, if I will press the click, I expect the list of to-dos to not be empty. I think it's a really human way of understanding the testing in general and approaching the test in general. So it does cover their actual test cases in the application in a more humane way rather than Enzyme. And if we consider a different case, so we have here edit mode. Do we? Yes, we do. Yeah, we still have it. So it's just editing mode. It doesn't happen much, but the way Enzyme, you would test with Enzyme is you would, again, render an element. You would expect the certain state of this component to be false. Then you would directly access the component instance using the instance method and call their methods right from the test. And then you would expect that the state has changed from false to true. And in React testing library, however, you are making an assertions based on text and based on visual changes in your DOM. So before I click done, I can see editing, and once I click done, I should not see editing. So I think it's very interactionable. So going back to their slides, these are the actual reasons why Enzyme is located at the very bottom of unit testing, because it cares about the component instance, and you're only making changes based on this, or you're making assertions based on state, which is very internal. And this is also not how users think about your application. And React testing library, however, is closer to the user in a way that it does replicate their actual actions of users. So would it be objective to say that React testing library is better than Enzyme? Considering that you don't have enough resources to run real tests, end-to-end tests with Cypress, I would say that React testing library is more likely to better test that your application is still working. And Enzyme, if you have resources for real end-to-end tests, then, and if you want to check how your logic flow is implemented inside of your application, well, feel free to use Enzyme. But I would be so happy to see my next project to be launched with React testing library instead of Enzyme. And going back to reasons are not to test. It takes much less time to learn React testing library because it works on DOM. And I think you know what DOM is. Yes, I mean, you have DOM everywhere. It also gives you a nice positive bonus since it's based on DOM assertions are there also. Angular testing library, Vue testing library, DOM testing library, and whatever will come next, testing library. So you already know how to write component tests in Angular. Congratulations. That's it. Questions?
So, any questions from remote?
Hi, question from Stockholm, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, or maybe more a comment. We've been using Enzyme quite extensively and basically use it on the same level as your examples of React test library. So, to me, it feels like Enzyme allows you to go down to the low level, but you don't necessarily have to. You can still use it to validate the DOM. And if you look at it that way, what do you feel like React test library adds? Because you don't have to go with state. You can actually inspect the DOM and so on with the Enzyme as well.
I would say that even though it can do this, it also gives you all the tools to misuse certain patterns. And in my R, I also made a repository to cover. Can we see this? Oh, we can. So the actual existence of the shallow renderer does lead you to generating false positive and false negative results sometimes. And I also created a list of false positive and false negative results. Like, for example, if you throw an error in your application, it never works. Okay, I totally missed the question. Was it about that our React testing library doesn't have much of our support for low-level testing?
No, it's just that given that your example, like most of the examples you used with React test library can also be done in Enzyme. You don't have to go and peek at the state. You can actually see how what it results in the DOM.
Sure, but I think it's still more implementation oriented in a way that our still assertions are being run against state, and when you do those, there are so many things that do not happen naturally in Enzyme, and it even doesn't take care about even propagation, which works better in React testing library. But if it works for you, I would say it's great. I think it's just easier to use React testing library. And if you can, like, if the application heavily relies on the logic go underneath, and it's really business oriented, then it's also really nice to have Enzyme tests and more of unit tests.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, did React testing library have some elegant way of waiting for stuff to kind of appear on the screen? Or
Yeah.
the screen should be in quotes, but
I think there is
how does that work?
Oh, did you finish the question?
Yes.
Okay. There is a wait method, so it can actually quite elegantly wait for things to happen.
Right, so you can say that wait for a button called OK to appear and then click on it. Beautiful.
I'm not sure, but I think you can even specify the amount of time you can wait for. Like 2 seconds, really long, but it does support their synchronous operations.
Neat, thank you.
Hi, Kalki here from Munich. I've got a quick question about the shallow rendering as well. Since you can't do shallow rendering, what if a child component has like an external API request? How do you test that component in isolation without firing off the API request?
Good question. Do you mean how it should be implemented, or?
Well, just if I've got a parent component that I want to test, but somewhere down the chain I've got, say, a GraphQL query component that loads something from a server. but that server may not exist if I'm in a, say, CI testing environment. So how would I kind of test my parent component without firing off the API request from a child component?
You mock API requests, so I think there is mock supported. And also, if you want, there is a way to create a function that will wrap all the container components that you are trying to render in router context and Redux context. So the idea of this is that you can actually right away mount your components with already populated data, and you will not need to fire requests, or you can just mock those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis.